and try to remember to do the recording so that people can watch it in other time zones and in the future, because we all don't necessarily know when we can do it. I can't believe Sai is joining us from the other side of the world. Now that's dedication. All right. Well, today's session is about Xdebug and DDEV, and we'll talk about Xdebug in general and its integration with DDEV in specific. And so we'll be looking at a number of things. The first thing that we have to understand is how Xdebug works so that we can support other people with it and sort out problems. I imagine, hold up your hand if you have ever had a problem with Xdebug doing the right thing for you. We have all had complexity with Xdebug in our history, and when it's your friend, you can find your way through it. But if it's not your friend, it can just make you crazy. I always say that learning to step debug is one of the very top first items that I want to do in any language that I ever want to be involved with. So people who tell you that they don't need to use Xdebug in PHP, well, you know what I think about that. I think it's the first thing in any language. Any language, master the debugging environment. And of course, in most people in the PHP world will use either PHP Storm or VS Code, but there are a number of other IDEs and other ways to do it. You can actually debug from within Vim. You can do all the things, but they all work from the same place. Let's take just a moment and go around the room and introduce ourselves so that we all know each other. Just say who you are, what you work on, or what you do with DDEV, and where you are in the world, that kind of thing. I'm Randy Fay. I'm the lead maintainer of the DDEV project, and I'm here in Palisade, Colorado, which is the far western side of Colorado in the U.S. Let's see. Let's go with Truls next.
Yes, hello, my name is Truls. I'm from Norway, and I am working as a DevOps. And also I'm very interested in Drupal. But our company, they deliver both Drupal, WordPress, Laravel. So we are using DDEV for our environment, yeah. Local environment.
Excellent. Mauricio, go ahead.
Sure. My name is Mauricio Dinarte. I am from Nicaragua. I've been in Drupal for about 15 years, and I've been using DDEV, I would like to say, for 5 years. It just makes my life easier as a developer. I very much standardize on Drupal. I mean on DDEV since a few years ago.
Excellent. And Mauricio is one of the world's leading experts on Drupal migrations.
Thank you.
Ofer, go ahead.
My name is Ofer Shal. I live in Boca Raton, Florida. DDEV make my life easy, and my mission is to get companies I work for to switch to DDEV. Otherwise, I work on DrupalPod to allow make contribution easy.
But you still have to use Doxel in your day-to-day work, right?
Exactly. Well, we're in talks now in switching to DDEV. Yeah.
Okay. It must be interesting to go back and forth. Yeah, Sai is not going to speak up because it's the middle of the night, and so glad you're here, Sai. Ralph, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Ralph from Nuremberg, Germany, and yeah, I'm using DDEV mainly for testing and also yeah, testing DDEV itself.
Very, very cool. Oh, these things always move around on me. Steven, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Steven. I'm from Germany. I do Drupal 15 years now. And yeah, I work on DDEV since 2 years now, working with it. It's really cool.
Great to have you.
And there
And
was a discussion about the MacBook, and I'm finally ordering a new MacBook now.
there you go. That was your
Yeah, that
discussion, huh? And you got
yeah,
the
yeah.
loaded Mac M3 Pro that there can be.
Yeah, but I'm gonna stick with a little bit cheaper one, 4,000.
Wow. Yeah, I think any of them will be great. The reality is the Apple Silicon is just fantastic. And if you have a 16 gig Apple Silicon machine, you'll be fine with anything you do. So, and you got a lot more than that. And
Okay, you
Sebin,
think?
do I say your name right, Sebin?
Yeah, it's Steven.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Steven. I'm from Serbia. I've been using DDEV for a couple of years now. I'm trying to contribute to the ecosystem, and my use cases primarily revolve around WordPress, Node.js, and clusterization. We also use DDEV as a staging environment for client websites. So we have a public-facing instance available only in Serbia and to specific IP addresses, but we have achieved full Let's Encrypt integration. So looking forward to contribute more.
Great to have you. Did I get everybody? Looks like I did. We will go ahead and I just want to make sure, I think with this crew here, I don't have to spend much time on it, but I'm just going to demonstrate the basic way that the default way that you do a DDEV setup with Xdebug, just so that we're all on the same page. I imagine with sophisticated users like you that you have other ways that you use it, but I'm just going to demonstrate the standard way that we document how to do it. It doesn't mean that any other way is wrong or anything like that, but the intention is if we do a DDEV Xdebug on, that will actually just enable the Xdebug extension inside the container. So if I do a DDEV PHP version here, then you'll see that it says with Xdebug 332 by Derek. I want you to notice something while we're here, though. Can everybody see my screen okay? And is
Yes.
the type is big enough? Take a look at what Derek has done. The copyright is from 2002 to 2024. He has been maintaining this essentially on his own for 22 years. So if you ever wondered where Xdebug comes from, you know the XKCD cartoon. It's from this guy in he happens to be in England, but we'll say this one guy in Nebraska has been making Xdebug work for us all those years. Send him some money. Sign up for monthly donations to him. He's also a I don't know what they call it in the PHP world. He's a core contributor in the PHP world. So yeah, Derek is always trying to make that work for us over 22 years. So pay attention and support him and follow him in all the places and send him money. DDEV sends money every month to Derek and the xdebug.org. Okay, so I did the DDEV Xdebug on, and then what I would do next is in PHP Storm, I would tell it to listen. And in the new interface, this is the listen thing here. That says, tell PHP Storm to listen on port 9003. And that's the place that we are. And I need to go to web index.php here. And I'm going to set a breakpoint. And now I should be able to just curl, if I do a DDEV list here. I should just be able to curl https://DDEV d10.ddev.site, and it should stop, and it does. So I could have done that with the browser. It's a little easier to have less windows going. So now, of course, with PHP Storm or with VS Code, I can step through here. I can see the values of the variables, and I can step into code with an F7. The step in, step out there's several different ways to do it. I'm using the function keys, so I can do an F8 here and step over one. So that's what Xdebug is doing when it does things, when it works the easy way. And in DDEV, we try to make it the easy way all the time. DDEV has been really quite good over the years at making Xdebug always work, but Xdebug is a complicated animal, and it is a networked animal, and that makes things a little more complicated than you would hope, because firewalls get in the way, even VPNs can get in the way. WSL2 is the most complicated place. There's a history of issues with different Docker providers doing different things and all that sort of thing. So that's the basic how it's supposed to work in the simplest possible situation. You can also you can also set it up just fine with a browser extension that turns on and off the listening and doesn't. But I have liked the very simple approach of DDEV Xdebug on to enable the extension and off to disable it. There's also a toggle and a couple of things like that. Any questions or thoughts about that basic use case?
Are there any hooks fired for the Xdebug on and XHProf on off? So are there hooks fired when we toggle them?
There aren't any. I never thought about that. Now, the VS Code, the default VS Code setup in the docs actually has tasks that get run. So when you enable Xdebug in VS Code, it will automatically turn on, it does a DDEV Xdebug on. That's not exactly the same as what you're saying, but that is a standard feature of the default VS Code setup.
So here is my
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so my thought process is this. I've developed a custom 8x profiling extension, HXProf. So basically, when you install the extension automatically sets up the profiler and the like. But the thing is, since it defines the additional containers, the containers for the profiling are always run. So they take up resources and your battery life. But for example, if the debug on off and the profile on off commands had hooks, stuff can be done on those hooks. So for example, for the debugging, if somebody is not using the VS Code or doesn't have the extension which sets up the debugging tests automatically, extensions could be made which could further improve, simplify, customize the debug and profiling experience.
Let me show you what the actual command is here, because these are just custom commands. So I'm just going to go into /.ddev commands, and I'm going to go into the host. These are No, they're not host commands. They are web commands. So these actually happen inside the web container when you do them. So if we look at Xdebug, you see that it is just a bash script. So DDEV Xdebug is just a bash script. And it's not all that relevant to what we're doing today, but let's look at what it does. If we go to on, it runs the script enable Xdebug, which just all that does is inside the web container, it enables the extension. And toggle does, you know, so enable, disable, and toggle, and that's all it does. So this script could be enhanced to do extra things inside the web container. That would be trivial to do. And XHProf is a very similar animal. It just turns things on and lets them run. So it again is just a script, and that script could take other actions during the enable, or the enable script could be enhanced. It's in user local bin inside the web container. So I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think we should go too far into XHProf world because we're not there right now. We're talking about Xdebug today. But the fact that both of these are shell commands that can be overridden by ordinary users and that can be enhanced with a PR that doesn't even require any Go work or anything like that, offers potential in the areas that you're talking about. In fact, it makes you think about how could this work with like the default setup with the default setup with VS Code, where it automatically turns on and off Xdebug. That's pretty interesting. And so could we do some more like that? It's handicapped a little bit that this executes inside the web container, which doesn't know anything about the it doesn't know anything about what's going on the
Yeah,
host.
and that's why I mentioned the hook system, because if a command execution, since we execute those commands via the DDEV executable, so we do DDEV Xdebug on off, maybe a global hook system which can be like before command name or after command name as a global hook system, which would basically enable easy extension. So nobody needs to edit the execution script per se, but they can just add in the config file after command xdebug do this.
It's got some interesting thinking, interesting perspective. So that's good stuff. Let's talk about what Xdebug actually does when you are using it, because this is where people actually get confused all the time, and it's super important. So Xdebug is a network protocol. It is when you tell PHP essentially to use the Xdebug extension and to activate, what it does is it tries to talk to the place that it's configured to talk. It is the thing that initiates a connection. So a lot of people are under the misconception that their IDE is starting or stopping Xdebug or is giving commands to your PHP, and that is not the case at all. What actually happens, let me just see here if I've got, let me just open another window here. What actually happens is that your IDE is listening for actions on the host. So I'm going to turn this off here in PHP Storm, and I'm going to use the nc command to listen. So I'm going to say NC-L-P9003, and hopefully I'm using the correct, no, I didn't use the right one. NC dash that every version of NC is different, and I was just working with it on WSL2, and now I can't use the right one. NC-H. We want on here, we want to use I thought that I had it right. NC-L 0.0.0.09003. How about that? Let's see if it works. So we still have Xdebug enabled, but now instead of our IDE, we have Netcat listening. Netcat just listens on a port and reports what it happens. So if we go here, we see that Xdebug is still enabled, and let's try our curl again. And we have told our DDEV setup and the PHP inside it that we want to do Xdebug. So theoretically, when I do a curl here, it will try to connect, and it did try to connect to the host and give magic XML instructions to the host. So this is what we see coming through here. So this is the initiation of the connection from PHP. Because it got a web request, it is then connecting to the server that it is, to the IDE essentially, that it is intended to connect to. And you see that it's identified the file here that things are happening in. And of course, NC is a very, very bad, very bad IDE. All it did was capture the request. So when I did a listen on the host, and then I initiated a web request with a curl, I immediately get a connection from inside the web container. This might be more obvious if I go inside, and it's not that much more obvious, but the point is, it's PHP that is making the connection. And if I'm listening for it, and I do a curl localhost, for example, inside the container, then that kicks off the Xdebug issue. And so if you understand that, PHP or PHP FPM with the Xdebug extension is initiating everything that happens, then you will be able to solve almost any Xdebug problem that you ever come up against. Does that make any sense? Any questions about that?
Does that mean that is there a port mapping between the host and the container?
The actual language that they're talking is this language right here. It's XML, and the way it decides what to do, who to contact, who's the host, is inside the container. We have host.docker.internal as a host name. And so host.docker.internal is how PHP knows who to contact. That's configured into the default PHP Xdebug INI. But I'm not sure I answered your question.
I guess I was expecting to see something that would say port 9003 inside of the container maps to port 9003 in my host machine, so that the IDE in my host machine can listen to those connections.
So your host machine has to listen on all ports, on most environments. On Mac, it doesn't matter much because there's just one network interface to listen to. So it's only the host side that 9003 is relevant. We have that configured inside the container. So if I go here to etc PHP 8.3 FPM conf.d, here's the Xdebug, and this is configured by default. So this is DDEV set up for Xdebug. Of course, it's telling us where the extension is, but it says Xdebug client host is host.docker.internal. Now, I've had a long-running conversation about this. I don't think that, because of the nature of the words client and server in networking, I think that should be called server host, because the IDE or the host is actually the listener, and the client, or the one who initiates the TCP connection, is the client. So to me, it's backwards, but the bottom line is we have this configured into PHP configuration to tell it where host.docker.internal is. And host.docker.internal, DDEV has figured out in the many different Docker providers what that should be set to, and DDEV has set that so that it can find. And then here's the client port. So that's saying that on host.docker.internal, we want to connect to port 9003.
Great, thank you.
Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it's making more sense. Yes,
Yeah.
thanks.
But the bottom line is, inside the container, in PHP, we are making a connection to the configured location, which is host.docker.internal and port 9003. Any other, but this is pretty much off into the, kind of off into the weeds, but if you understand the networking situation, you can solve any problem with Xdebug. And so it's worth understanding that. If I go over here to PHP Storm and I say listen, then I will be able to telnet. I'm going to use telnet as a way to establish a TCP connection. Host.docker.internal 9003, and you see it will connect. If I turn that off and I try to connect, it's unable to connect because it isn't there. And so when that situation is working, then we have solved all of our networking problems. So when we have our IDE listening and we can connect to it from within the container, we essentially have no problems. I want to take a look next at the debugging situation in the troubleshooting section of DDEV, but give you a chance if you want to ask any questions right now. Sai has a question. So Sai, you've had trouble debugging CLI scripts, and there are most CLI scripts work pretty well with DDEV, but the problem that you typically have is that the code is not mapped into the project. So, for example, I used to always have trouble before Drupal 8 with debugging anything regarding Drush, because Drush was packaged as a separate binary, and it was usually like in user local bin or something, and user local bin inside the container is completely unknown to the IDE. And so what I would do is would download the Drush code and put it in my project, and then put a breakpoint in that. So that's a classic reason for having trouble with CLI. Any other questions before we move on to troubleshooting issues?
I have some questions regarding symlinks and directory stuff, which might be interesting.
So symlinks in a container environment have to be relative, or they will go outside of their space. So, for example, if we are in var www.html, which is the mounted container inside DDEV, we can do symlinks there that are within its file space, but we can't do symlinks that go outside of the project or absolute symlinks because
But
it's mounted elsewhere.
Yeah, but the use case I'm talking about, which I actually wasn't able to figure out, and I can probably demonstrate it in like 30 seconds, or I can try to explain it. So I have a WordPress plugin, which is a client-facing plugin, which I'm using on multiple websites. So I'm using it on multiple DDEV installations. So I'm doing a hard mount from my project folder to the plugin folder in the DDEV project via docker.compose mounts file. And I wasn't able to get the Xdebug to map the paths between the local path and the plugin path itself in the DDEV project. Is it something that's workable via custom configurations, or I should literally drop it?
I would think, I don't want to go there right now because I think we'll just go into a rabbit hole, but I'd be happy to follow that up in Discord with you. I would think we could be able to do that. I would start with the simpler. So what Sieben is talking about is that you can actually mount more than just your plain regular project directory into the container. You can mount other things as well. And he's mounting other things in there, and he wants Xdebug to work somewhere outside of the project directory. And it would be my opinion that you could do that by changing your mapping in PHP Storm or whatever you use. But you do have to have each of them mapped. Symlinks will have to be relative, I think, for that to work. But be happy to take that up in Discord. Let's take a look at the DDEV debugging because this is fundamental, and usually you can sort out anything with it. And if you understand the basics of what's going on that we just went through, which direction the network request is going. So the fact that PHP is initiating a request. So if we take a look at the troubleshooting docs, which I have to go back to regularly, make sure that your IDE is listening because it's not going to work otherwise. Take a look at DDEV logs. So let's see if I do DDEV logs here and I'm not listening, I should get this situation. If I do a curl here, okay. You see here it says could not connect to debugging client. That's what this one is. That's because my IDE isn't listening. So if I could even do I can do a DDEV logs-f and just watch this. And then if I'm in D10, and you'll see it actually come right through there in the warning with the DDEV logs. So I mean, yes, it's silly. We know that our IDE should be listening, but we've all been caught by this. So make sure that your IDE is listening and make sure that you've done the DDEV logs. And if your IDE is listening, then you may have a problem with host.docker.internal. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. How many of you are not working on Mac? I guess,
I'm not.
yeah.
I'm
So-
on WSL.
Yeah, WSL is the most complicated, and I'll give that just a little bit. Ofer, go ahead. Oh yeah, Ofer's on Gitpod and WSL. Ofer, you're not on your Mac most of the time. Oh, you're on your Mac on Doxel. Everywhere else you're on WSL. I got you. Okay, good. So on Mac, you really don't usually have trouble with this class of problem. You just have the trouble of forgetting to listen or forgetting to enable, that kind of thing. But on Linux particularly, and on WSL specifically, there are quite a number of things that can go wrong. And so there's a number of ways to look at those and find out what's going on. So I wanted to show you one trick that is really important. Let me show it to you on WSL. So here we are on WSL, and I want to know what is going on with host.docker.internal. Like I say, host.docker.internal is almost always figured out correctly on Mac, but it is quite a piece of magic on WSL and sometimes on Linux. So if we do a export DDEV debug equals true, and I do a DDEV start here on WSL, then it will show me why it chose the IP address. Here it is right here. It says host.docker.internal is 172.17 blah, 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 because we're using WSL2, not Docker Desktop, and we got that addressed from using the technique IP-4 router show default. So it gets the default router. So like I say, this isn't very much of a problem for you Mac people, but for WSL2 users, especially when they're using the IDE on the Windows GUI, it is complicated. Because in WSL you can actually run your IDE in Linux with the GUI, or you can run it on Windows. You can do a lot of different things, and it can blow your brain. Seben, you're using your IDE on the Windows IDE, right? On the Windows GUI.
Yeah, I'm using VS Code with the WSL remote extension.
Oh,
I'm
so
on Windows 11.
So you use the remote extension, which that actually is yet another complication. So.
Yeah, and especially if you're using additional Hyper-V hosts and custom network stack, stuff like that. Yeah, when I need to reinstall my system, I actually consider suicide as an option because of the amount of time I need to spend to reset everything.
Networking in WSL is absolute magic, but networking in it is really, really something. And it's so
Yeah, because Microsoft is doing it wrong.
Okay. Let me mention a couple of other things in the debugging world here. Hang on just a second. I'm not going to go much deeper into a WSL because all we have here is an expert that's using it, 2 experts. Shal, do you have, Ofer, do you have trouble with Xdebug and your either Gitpod or WSL, or do you do okay with it? Maybe Ofer's not here anymore. Okay. But of course, the standard things that we always want to be thinking about is disable your firewall or VPN if you're having trouble. We're dealing with a network protocol. And you know, do things like rebooting your computer. Anytime you're working on things like that, do a DDEV power off, do a reboot of your computer, especially when there's networking type behaviors. Some people will have something extra listening on the port. You could get that if you had both VS Code and PHP Storm running at the same time, for example. So do the standard normal debugging things. Use your DDEV logs. Don't forget to tell your IDE to start listening. Use curl to create the web request. All those things that you can do. That is a lot of debugging instructions. And you notice there's a whole other section for WSL2 Xdebug instructions. It's because it's a complex network environment. Now, I think I have gone way too far into the weeds. So let's just talk about problems that you might have had, or that you might have seen, or that you might have helped people with, and how they can be solved, or other things that people need to know about Xdebug. As you
Well,
can see, go ahead. Go ahead.
my opinion is that, for example, we've talked a bit about WSL. Once the networking stack between the Windows and the WSL and everything works, so you get the host.docker.internal resolved properly, and everything is rock stable, there are actually not too many bugs and issues there. But that first step is actually one of the hardest to do properly, and it basically isn't covered by DDEV because it can be different from the installation to the installation and from user to user. So if that works, then most of the other stuff works. But if that initial step is not set up correctly and the networking isn't resolving their DNS issues, there are port forwarding issues between the WSL and the Windows installation, which can also happen, especially when you include an antivirus into the mix. That's the hard part. So I think that the bigger problem with the WSL is the base level, which can be solved easily and can't be handled universally because of the differences between user setups, than by the DDEV extension or the DDEV project or the Xdebug extension. So these are basically this is the main caveat. And this is why I talked about the system reinstallation, because depending on the Windows 11, for example, version, is it 22H2, is it 22H1, the initial stuff that gets set up when you install the system is way different. But
It is a
there are
lot.
talks on, yeah, but there are talks on the GitHub issues. I'm actually subscribed to like 20 of them, where they're tracking the progress of unifying the setup experience and unifying the Hyper-V setup. But you are correct, and I'm not sure that you're aware how much you are correct, that it's an insane layer of magic and hidden abstraction behind the hidden abstraction.
It is.
But
It's
a necessary evil.
The one thing that you can do, and that people do, is they do custom Xdebug configuration, and you can do that in your project with, it's explained here in the docs. The docs don't show anything messing with Xdebug, and I don't recommend messing with the Xdebug configuration unless you have a particular reason to, because, well, I'm a fan of the default DDEV setup. The default DDEV setup is very simple, very clear. It doesn't require any browser extensions or anything like that. But you can, for example, you could easily change the port number. Somebody the other day changed the client host IP, which I don't recommend doing. I recommend getting host.docker.internal to be correct. But when you're happy, I'm happy. So that's the key thing. We really want people to be successful with Xdebug because it's a fundamental part of a developer's workflow. You have to be able to inspect what your code is doing. You're a little too quiet for me, so tell me how far off into the wrong weeds I went, and what experiences you've had that, especially that DDEV could improve your experience with Xdebug.
Maybe a basic troubleshooter, basic health check, like DDEV debug check or something like that for us Windows and WSL folks, just to check if some basic stuff is okay and maybe suggest improvements. I think that can be easily coded in Bash even, because for example, I run a company. I have 3 or 4 developers working for me, and since the unnamed virus of unknown origins, we've been relegated to home office. We haven't returned to our offices itself, so everybody is using their own device. And across their my developers' system reinstalls and reconfigurations, that's where I experienced the stuff where the configuration varies widely, and I had to do most of the debugging and troubleshooting the initial setup myself. But I think that can be relegated to a simple Bash script, which can or may be integrated into the DDEV itself.
Yeah,
It basically will run through the basic steps of checking the networking, if everything can communicate with itself, and then maybe point to the user, okay, go to this step in the docs. I can share my experiences and some of my troubleshooting stuff I'm doing in the documentations. I can make a PR, but regarding the troubleshooter itself, which can be implemented into the project itself, I would definitely need to link up with you. Or
you could even do a like a step-by-step that was a prompted debugger that would make this a little easier. So a prompted debugger where you say, now start your IDE listening, and then step 2 is we could exec into the container and see if it was listening. We could also do a listen from Go or from NC or something on the host side and see if we got a connection. So that's some good thinking. That's some good thinking. That'd be another step forward for DDEV's Xdebug implementation. It's a good idea.
Yeah, because I do not want to sound like a Debbie Downer or something like that, but the amount of issues regarding the Windows and WSL and that interconnection can really be unsurmountable for someone who is not a power user, who doesn't have experience in deep down Linux administration, or doesn't know how Windows works.
If they
In all fairness, I had to contact a colleague of mine, which actually does only Windows administration, to just call him and like, okay, I need you to go with AnyDesk to telnet into my machine and to configure Hyper-V to do this exact stuff. And That's for my personal PC. Before that, I couldn't resolve for the life of me the host itself from the Docker machines. It wouldn't work in any case. So yeah, some of that stuff
It's a,
can be like trickled down into a simple troubleshooter. And if all else fails, we can just inform the user, okay, go to Discord, scream for help.
it's a good idea. Any other thoughts or questions before we call it for today? I sure appreciate you coming and all your good thinking and thoughts and your experience. If not, we'll let you get on to your next meeting or to go debug something very complicated. So,
Thank you very much.
thanks, everybody. Great to have you here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy.
Same here.